Hi guys, welcome back to the EC Physio YouTube channel. We're continuing on with cleat setup. It's the only fixed point on the bike, so it's important to have this part dialed in. Today's video is on how to set up your stance width. Stance width is a bit more involved than the rest of the fit. There are a lot of factors to consider, but I'll go over general and common issues corrected with stance width. We generally need to look at three things that will determine stance width. The first thing is the size of the rider, more specifically how wide or narrow the rider's hips are. Since the Q factor, or the distance between the crank arms, is fixed on a bike, it may not be an ideal width for every person. Secondly, if someone's hips are retroverted or lacks range of motion into hip flexion and internal rotation, they will not like riding a bike with a narrow stance. Another condition that affects hip range of motion is OA, short for osteoarthritis. Lastly, we need to look at knee alignment on the bike. If there's a mismatch between hip width, available hip range of motion, and stance width, the knees will likely track in a poor manner. This may result in discomfort on the bike, like knee pain and back pain. If you're a larger rider or have wider hips, there is more flexibility and adjustment for a wider stance. Less common though is if you're a smaller rider with narrow hips, there are less options in adjustment to create a narrower stance. To set up stance width on your own, you'll need to set up your bike on a stationary trainer with a laser leveler and either a mirror or a camera setup to provide feedback for your adjustments. Place a marker on the bony region on the front of your knee called the tibial tuberosity, and place another marker on your front of the shoe that lines up with your second metatarsal. Next, you want to line the laser up to the marker on your shoe. As a general rule, we want the knees to track up and down directly above your feet. We don't need it to be perfect, but we want to get it within the ballpark. Cycling is very dynamic in that the knees will track differently when you're just cruising along versus going for a hard effort or even just climbing out of the saddle. The knee will track differently in different situations. As a good rule of thumb, if you're noticing that the knee tracks lateral or outside to the laser, your stance width is too narrow. Make the correction by moving the cleats medially to widen the width. You can also add width by placing pedal spacers between the crank and the pedal. If you're noticing that your knee tracks medial or to the inside of the laser, try moving your cleats laterally to narrow your stance width. There's a bit more complexity to fit a scenario where your knees are tracking diagonally. Head to your local experienced bike fitter to help with more complex fit issues. As I've mentioned in the past, having a biomechanical assessment will provide a lot of information and foresight into how to set up the bike. Here's a portion of the assessment where I look at lower limb range of motion. This cyclist presented with some limitations to his left hip range. Check out how this looks when he's on the bike. Sometimes a 20mm spacer may be too much width to add. There are 1mm spacers available to do as well. With these ones, we can only add 1, sometimes 2 maximum safely, because it takes away from the available thread of the pedals to the crank arm. Other options for changing stance width is to look at a pedal system that allows for more customization. On speed play pedals, you can customize the axle length, and on Shimano road system, the SPDSLs, they come in standard length and also a 4mm longer length version for a wider stance width. So that's stance width in a nutshell. So get out there and try to get your fit dialed in. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next week.